Live, that is DRJ Radio Live, then you've seen the promotion of this astounding guest that we've had planned for a long time to bring on the show. And if you've been listening to Art Bell, I'm Art Bell, and you're listening to Dr. J Radio Live. Who we're talking about. Let me give you a little quick premise first. The show we're going to be talking to you about is time travel and other things. If you all are hesitant to believe about time travel, well, first of all, there's a lot of government projects that show that they've been testing time travel. And even for those skeptics out there, remember, Einstein and you're listening. This is Mr. Hammond, and you're listening to I'm Richard C. Hoagland, and you're listening to I'm Art Bell, and you're listening. You have the ability to warp the space-time continuum. Even Bob Lazar, after working at S4, said the same thing. That once you're available to create artificial gravity waves, things such as force fields, wormholes, time travel, and all that is considered science fiction literally is thrown out and becomes fact by that afternoon. And that is exactly why I'm very excited to speak to today's guest. The only other time we talked about time travel in the past was with Andrew Basiago. But I gotta tell you folks, between that guest and today's guest, this guest today is far, far more credible and has far more stories that I think are dead on accurate that he has to share with you all. I think I've thrown you enough hints, so let me go ahead and introduce him. And I want to say, not only am I proud to introduce him, I look forward to having this guest on multiple times because he is really a down-to-earth person and has so much information. The man I'm speaking about is Mr. John Titor II. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you.
The pleasure is all mine, and absolutely the listeners, of course. Now, for those people who clearly, before we even started today's show, I've been getting questions from lots of people from the moment that we announced that you were going to be on. And the number one question is something that I even brought to you before the show, which was, how did you get involved in time travel?
Basically, from the very beginning of my career with the Air Force, I was and I was a member of a 4-man team, 2 females, 2 males, and we were being trained to, from the very beginning of my career, learn to fly, and then ultimately fly something called the TR-3B Astra. And Dulce base is a very interesting place. And Phil Schneider, he talked about it, but
yes.
The thing was that they clone human beings there. And I'm going to tell you why. 70% of the applicants that the Air Force gets, even today, are not fit for military service.
Yes. I know this because my brother is a Marine, and unfortunately, I wasn't physically fit and able to join the military. And of all the branches myself, John, it was the Air Force that I was interested in, and they didn't accept me because of not being to par as far as physical standards.
They have very high standards. If the demand is great for pilots, they want pilots, and they go begging for them. It's really difficult for them to fill those positions. And the Air Force basically has access to what we call black technology. And it's a whole variety of things that they got from extraterrestrials. And they barter with extraterrestrials. And in the early 1950s, Dwight Eisenhower signed 4 agreements with extraterrestrials. They were the tall whites, the grays, the Anunnaki, and the gray aliens.
This was at Muroc Airfield, right? which is now known as Edwards Air Force Base. And the infamous meeting that I'm aware about was in 1954. Is that the same meeting you're talking about?
There were a couple meetings. What happened was, I think that they had meetings at Edwards. I think they had meetings at Holloman. And ultimately, they did a signed agreement. And the tall white extraterrestrials wanted a base on our soil, on the soil of the United States. And we gave them one. And there was this gunnery range called Indian Springs. It's about 1 hour north of Vegas. And the whole thing is, it's on the map. But what it really is now is called Creech Air Force Base. And this Air Force Base is the most heavily defended Air Force base on the planet. It's just incredible. And what has been seen on Google Earth over Creech Air Force Base is nothing less than the spacecraft of the tall whites. They've been seeing people send in FOIAs and said, what are these objects? And the Air Force says, anything but the truth. As you might imagine, like people ask me, well, with a FOIA, if I send it in, won't they tell me the truth? And my answer is no.
They're going to give you a redacted paper that is mostly black and maybe has the date or page number.
Oh, it's terrible. And that's just the way they are, and they're going to be that way. But in the early 1950s, they spent millions building an underground spaceport for the tall whites. And the tall whites are probably thousands of years ahead of Homo sapiens and mankind on this planet. And we barter with them different things, and they're not hard to deal with. And the thing about them is, and I've actually been to dinner with one, and they're very tall, and they look like us. They can pass for us. And occasionally when I see them, they acknowledge me, and then they go about their business. You're talking somewhere between 7 and 8 feet tall, and they're telepathic. They recognize me right away because I'm quizzing them. Why are they here? They're occasionally seen in even the casinos in Las Vegas. And Clark County Sheriff, if there's any kind of disturbance, they are tasked with assisting the tall white individuals involved in a kind of disturbance and doing whatever they can to make the problem go away.
I'm actually really glad you mentioned the fact that they are seen in casinos. I don't remember the gentleman who worked at Creech Air Force Base as a meteorologist, and he was constantly encountering them. But he also said exactly what you said, Mr. Titor, that these tall whites obviously their CIA handlers would literally, because they were apparently so bored, all the time they spent at Indian Springs, and they wanted to have some fun. And so the CIA would come and literally clear out areas of the casino in front of them, behind them, and on either side of them. That way, people that were walking through the casino wouldn't necessarily come in contact with them or pass right by them. And so what you said is exactly a verification of what someone else has said. And since so few people know about the tall whites, where they have their base, which, like you mentioned, Creech Air Force Base in Indian Springs, just verifies that everything you've been through, Mr. Titor, is exactly as it's been happening and still happening.
It does. There's a lot more extraterrestrial activity all over the planet. And I don't know why. I know that there's a lot of sightings going on in Arizona. I was investigating a sighting of reptilians eating Homo sapiens, mankind, over near Globe, Arizona. And what happened when I got there was that there were 3-man sniper teams out, and they were definitely military types. And I encountered them. I gave them my business card, told them who I was, and they told me that they were hunting for javelinas. And what was even more interesting, the particular area where I was, there was a little village there. There was an RV park, a Quick Mart, and a gas station. Everything was deserted except for these military guys. And they were there with high-powered rifles. And what came to mind was this was an unauthorized incursion into an area by extraterrestrials, and they were there to handle it. And I don't have a problem with it. And obviously, whoever we have the agreement with for the reptilians, they didn't have a problem with it. But let's go back in time a little bit, or forward in time. In 2036, I had almost 30 years in the Air Force, and I was relieved of command. They didn't know what to do with me in 2036. And I was worried that I was just going to go to rendition or a shallow grave. I was scared. And I like, there was nowhere for me to go. And on the base at Area 51, and that's where I was, I had a few friends. And a couple of these friends were extraterrestrials. And one in particular, who goes by the name of Rock, he asked me, well, what are you going to do? And I said, could you take me back in time? And he said, where do you want to go? And I said, could you take me back to 2010? And he says, yeah, we could do that. And he says, are you going to try to take anything with you, a duffel bag, or tell them you're leaving and that's where you're going to go? And I said, no. They're going to just give me a paper here and discharge me, and I don't know what to do with myself. But I remember there was someone that I cared about back in 2010. If you take me there, I will get to a date close to the last time I saw her. I think that she would like to have me as a boyfriend or husband or something, but I want to go and be with her. And so they said, we'll do it. And so it was like 11 o'clock at night, and I went over to the hangar, and Rock met me and said, get in. And I did. And a short time later, we landed at a private airport here I'll just say near Santa Clarita. And we landed in 2 gray alien saucer type vehicles. And when I got out, my girl Shannon was waiting, and she drove up and gave me a hug and kiss, and I knew I was home.
Is that Air Force Base, unless you're not allowed to talk about it, is that China Lake or something like that?
No.
Okay.
But there's a couple little private airports here in the Santa Clarita area, and they pushed one spacecraft into a hangar. And they said, as they locked the hangar door for me, they said, it's yours to use as long as you want. So I have one. And basically, Marcia took me to her house, and I pretty much been with Marcia Shannon. We're married now ever since.
Let me ask you about two questions, but first let me start with 2036. Can you tell us what the setting was? Because in preparation for this interview, Mr. Titor, I not only seen something on YouTube about you, which was about a 40-minute, about 30, 38, 39 minutes interview with you, which actually the thumbnail was of an IBM computer. I know that's a whole nother story, but I also saw some other people who had been to various times, and they were all saying one thing that seemed to be consistent, which was two things. One, that the United States, or at least the cabal, the black projects, not necessarily the U.S., but other countries that are involved, were essentially perfecting and playing with time travel as early as 1981 or 82. And when the people went to, say, 2030, 2035, 2045, etc., one recurring theme that I happened to catch on all of them, which was two things are going to happen in 2028. One, time travel will be finally revealed to the public, as will the existence of extraterrestrials. Did you see that when you traveled to 2036?
People become aware of extraterrestrials, but not for the reason you think. Let's say for the moment that we have a spaceport at Creech Air Force Base, and they'll never open it to the public, okay? That would be a closed environment forever. But there have been so many well-documented sightings that the floodgates will open, and the issue is that I have I'll just cut to the chase. This one friend of mine, and he's actually commented on a post I did recently. His name is Thor, and Thor said, "Welcome to Earth. Evil and deception abounds." Ooh. And I agree with him. So most of the extraterrestrials are reticent to have open contact with human beings. And I have friends that are extraterrestrials, and right up front, there's some rules. I don't take their photograph.
They won't let you, right?
No, they will not let you, especially the tall whites, because what if they've integrated into some little place, and they have a place away from Creech now, and they're kind of accepted. No one notices anything about them except they're very tall, and their children are very tall, and you just don't want to jeopardize their cover, okay? Maybe they're Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and their kids are named Smith. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the fact that you mentioned that they do go to casinos actually proves a point that Dr. David Jacobs, who I'm sure you know, he's one of the preeminent alien abduction researchers who actually taught a course on alien abduction when he was a tenured professor at Temple University in Pennsylvania. His last book was basically having to do with extraterrestrials walking amongst us. And he was talking about this is a global matter, and it has to do with multiple extraterrestrials that essentially disguise themselves as human beings. And they could be walking down the street, and unless you have a heightened sense of your mind where you could send and receive telepathic thoughts or things like that, the differences are so subtle that you can literally walk down the street and one walks past you and you may not even know. Are you getting the impression that they are living with us all over the world?
Some are, And I wrote a white paper a while back, how to take control of an inhabited planet. And I tell you how they do these things, how they take over governments. They can. The way things are with the United States of America right now, the United States of America is a protectorate of the tall whites.
Yes.
When Donald Trump tells Kim Jong-un, if you mess with us, you will receive the fire and fury that you can't imagine.
He said to the likes I've never seen before in the history of man.
Yes, because the tall whites have a vested interest in this country, and they will not allow us to be attacked. And probably the only reason that we haven't had a nuclear war in all this time is because they have demonstrated to the Russians, and they've demonstrated to us, they can go to our missile silo bases and take control of the missiles in the silos. And they can basically do a scorched earth thing and turn North Korea, basically, it could evaporate it and turn South Korea into an island.
And another thing, when you mentioned that they have the ability to shut down our nukes and ICBMs, Malmstrom Air Force Base, I think it might have been the 60s, Captain Robert Salas not only talked about the fact that each ICBM is individually, a completely individual, meaning it's not connected to the other. So if that one goes down, it has nothing to do with the other missiles. Yet, when a craft came, it shut down all of them. I think there was 9 or so.
Yeah. So they have tremendous technological powers, and they're thousands of years ahead of us. What has occurred is that they have done some transfer of technology to us. And we've received some black technology from the Greys and even the reptilians. And the Gray aliens participate in the cloning process at Dulce Base in New Mexico. And that's where I come from.
I did a show on the Dulce base, and I'm going to ask you some questions to see if the information that I've received is correct. That the Dulce base in New Mexico has 7 layers, and it's allegedly a joint human and ET base, where the first 3 levels are humans, the 4th level is humans and ETs, and the bottom 3 levels are ETs only, where humans are not allowed. Is that what you were able to come across, or is the facts or the story that I've heard from the people I've had on the show?
Substantially correct. That is substantially correct. But that base is connected to other bases in North America with tunnels.
Maglev trains underground, right?
There's some trains, but they have roads there too to take big heavy trucks and things like that. So, but yeah, there is a tremendous tunnel system underneath the United States. It goes to most of the military bases, the Air Force military bases. Those are the ones I know about. And it's just a matter of national defense. I think that they thought that in the event of a nuclear war, but the interesting thing is in all this that I don't believe that we're going to have a nuclear war. Edward Snowden released documents to the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese have probably seen them too. the documents that we have with extraterrestrials and the fact that we are a protectorate of the tall whites now.
And my guess is this is why Vladimir Putin has been doing his darndest to keep him safe, because we all know that if the CIA, NSA, or any private military contractor, when they're ordered from somebody in DC or any of the other alphabet soup agencies, says, kill this person, make it look like an accident, Snowden would have been dead a long time ago. But I'm pretty sure, living in Moscow, Vladimir Putin personally has tasked the FSB to guard him because of the knowledge he knows. And one of the things that Vladimir Putin told Edward Snowden, that he said, if you Mr. Snowden, want to stay in this country, please do not go speak to any more journalists and tell what you've learned when you were an NSA and CIA contractor. And the reason I'm assuming he said this is because the information that Snowden has, Putin wanted to hear, and he didn't want it to become public. Did you get sort of that impression as well?
Well, I think that he protects Snowden, and Snowden knows it. I think that Snowden's very well taken care of there. What happened was that Putin went to Obama when it happened and tried to get Obama just to say, that the United States was now a protectorate of the tall whites. Obama won't. And by the agreement, he can't. And he won't break that agreement. There is a huge penalty if he does. And so he would be scared to death to do it. But Obama, even the Donald, after he got to be president, within a week, he got the Book of Secrets and read it. And then he got a briefing. And I'm sure he knows what the United States position is. And I think it's been a good thing for us. It's given us stability. Let's circle back to 2036 for a minute.
Yes, please.
What was happening was that there is so much graft and corruption within the Congress of the United States that ultimately the power of the Congress to govern becomes diminished, and diminished by law. And the executive branch, the president, has tremendous overriding powers. There are some people that are just evil and want to bring down the United States. If the United States were to actually fail, the tall whites would take over the government. And now we would be governed by extraterrestrials. I don't want to see that happen. I prefer that we remain as we are. But what happens with the government? It's just incredible. Some people on both sides of the aisle are going to be prosecuted here in the coming years. And I don't think that Hillary should feel safe. Everyone knows that she's responsible for 54 domestic murders.
Yes.
And the deaths of 20 CIA operatives.
And more so, for instance, the Benghazi incident. I know she'll never own
absolutely.
up to it. Yeah, all those deaths there are attributed to her.
She was too busy to help the State Department staff stationed at Benghazi, and Obama, he was so indecisive. I just think that was a turning point for her career with the State Department, and Obama got rid of her then. But the whole thing is that George Soros is bankrolling her for a run in 2020. And I will tell you that I have a relationship with President Trump. I was uh, on email to Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm.
I've shared with them both information. I will tell you that on my webpage on Facebook, I reprint the written response from Donald Trump that I get so people can read what he says to me.
At the end of the show, I definitely want you to plug everything in. But since you're talking about the Facebook right now and the response from POTUS, let's go ahead and put it out there in case those people who are listening can actually, if they're interested in reading
Facebook, right now. There's one page that most everybody can get to very easily. 177th Time Travel Division. You type that in and you'll get there and you'll get to read my white papers. I would say thousands of people comment on my posts. And then if you look at my posts, most of them have the keys to the kingdom in them. At the bottom, they tell you about my books, and then they tell you where my white papers are on Google. Facebook just kept losing my white papers. I moved them to Google, to Google Plus, and I never lost another one. And I have hundreds of documents there for people to read on everything: extraterrestrials, abductions, time travel, how we do it. Not in generalities. I just state how we do it, how it's done. I talk about abductions and why people are abducted. And I will tell you that we are farmed and harvested, but not necessarily by extraterrestrials that the government has agreements with. Do you follow me?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this just falls in line to what other people have said, that we wouldn't be abducted both if we did not tell the ETs to abduct us, and also there's the military abductions where humans are taking others and blaming it on the ETs when in fact it's humans causing the abductions. Am I right?
I'm going to side with David Paulides. Are you familiar with that
name?
Oh,
absolutely. Great friend of mine. Yes.
And Missing 411. And he states that in the last 20 years in national and state parks, we have had over 4 million people abducted. And
right under the noses of their parents, especially the children.
Yes, and children are very valuable. And then if we circle back to Travis Walton, when he was taken and he was inside the spacecraft, what happened was he saw gray aliens and he saw hybrids.
Human-looking aliens, you mean by hybrids, right?
Yes, but still noticeably extraterrestrial.
Bigger eyes and things like that.
Yes. Now, so the reason for the farming and the harvesting, and I'll just put it out here, and this is a scientific fact, and they know this now, that long-term space flights, we were gone for years and years, your DNA changes.
Let me throw two questions at you. One, is the government or cabal, meaning the secret government, threatening you for continuing to talk about this? And the second thing is that the reasons for farming and creating us, or no, you brought that up. First of all, are they threatening you for what you're talking about? And how far into space have we gone? Because if we're using these ET craft, John, I would think that we are able to traverse much further via wormholes.
Well, not necessarily wormholes. Like this, space travel is a lot of navigation, okay? And you have to understand, just navigating through our solar system, we have an asteroid belt, and we have the Kuiper belt, and we have to get out of the way of comets and meteors and everything. It's not a really straight line situation. We have to worry about gravitational fields and dark matter, and there's just a host of things. So navigating from this solar system to the other side of the galaxy, okay? But within this galaxy, we have exoplanets that are very similar to Earth. And the thing that people will probably not grasp is, but let me just preface this with something. Do we have a space force? Yes.
So it's been available long before Trump even announced it.
He's just trying to ease us into it. You know, there's a few, I think there's about $6 trillion missing at DOD.
Yeah.
You want to know where it went? It didn't go down the rabbit hole. It went to the Space Force, okay? We have one. And, you know, at one point, DOD got hacked. And it was a rather famous case. And they found out about something called Solar Warden. And,
yes.
okay.
Can you talk about Solar Warden? I know what it is, but for those listeners who
it's
may
in the
not...
public domain, I can talk about that. You know, like we're talking big spacecraft that can go big distances. And I actually had a mission to survey exoplanets, and I came back and turned in a report, and then they went ahead and they started colonizing 2 exoplanets.
The thing with exoplanets, John, is that I know we're only looking at places that could be habitable by humans. For instance, oxygen, water, not too cold, not too hot, things like that. However, that limits everything to carbon-based beings such as us. But for argument's sake, what if some of these creatures don't breathe oxygen and breathe nitrogen? Or what if they are not carbon-based, but silicone-based? If that's the case, then I would think that would expand the planets, the exoplanets available for other species to live on far more.
Well, ideally, we wanted Earth-like planets. I surveyed about a dozen, and we had 2 that were very good candidates. And then they went about the colonization process. And the real success of a colony is when they become self-sufficient. So do we have off-world colonies at this time? Yes. Are they self-sufficient? Pretty much. We don't have to send freighters of tooling and foodstuffs to them. They pretty much get up and running. They had some very interesting recruitment programs to find people in the medical field and aerospace and other disciplines to go to these 2 planets. And they were offered great deals, you know. You get a big house, you get land, and you get a job that was your dream to begin with. And you take your family in some instances, or you're looking at possible hookups there. It's not a bad deal. I was offered a position to be an administrator on an off-world colony, and the reason they just wanted to do that was to get me off Earth, and I would not be able to talk anymore. And I prefer to talk because I try to get the train back on the tracks, so to speak. I'm telling you in the next few seconds here that the environment is going downhill. more rapidly than the media tells you, and that there's more plastic in the ocean than fish, and the fish aren't fit to eat anymore, and the air is getting worse, and weather will just get more severe over a period of time.
And it has been getting severe, John, as you know.
Yeah. And chemtrails, they thought that they could geoengineer the planet with chemtrails, and they, put a lot of poisons and bromides in the atmosphere, and it really didn't work. And what happened was it just made hurricanes worse and more tornadoes, and we're seeing cataclysms of more intensity. And
so even earthquakes too. All my life, I'd never even heard of a 9.0 quake. Yet we've had several in the last 15 years.
Well, if you look at everything that's happening on the Pacific Rim, we're having a lot of volcanic activity.
Yes.
We just don't understand. This planet is a living thing, okay? It's a living entity, and it's having a tough time with what we've done to it. And that's why it's, in some ways, we have to balance our ecosystems against natural resources that we need for the country and for the world. And so Donald Trump, he has to balance our needs for oil and not be dependent on Middle Eastern oil supplies, and do drilling in places where people really don't want him to, but he's between a rock and a hard place. And there's some things that, like, we just have to do it. But hopefully we can do it in a way that won't damage the environment much more. But the environment is taking a huge hit, and people don't understand. Plastic straws, we pretty much outlawed them. But, the thing was that Barack Obama went to the Midway Island, the famous Midway Island from World War II. And it used to have pristine beaches. And he went there and saw seabirds and fish washed up on the shores of Midway Island. And everything had ingested plastics and were dead, starved to death. And then we have whales that beach themselves that are loaded with PCBs.
Ooh.
And beach themselves all over the world. The penguin.
I've actually seen some of these giant whales being beached off the coast of Ventura or Santa Barbara, and it's happened enough times to, when compared to the time I've been paying attention from after I was born in 79 until now, I didn't hear of anything like that happening in the California coast in the 80s or 90s until the last, say, 10 to 15 years.
So even the killer whales, the pods are monitored up in Alaska, and the size of the killer whale pods are getting smaller and smaller. So the seas are going to die, and the foodstuffs from the ocean will no longer be available to mankind. And this is going to create famine in third world countries. Now, we're going to see mass exodus from all over, mankind. Homo sapiens are going to be desperate for living places where they can get food and housing and take care of children. And what happens by the time we hit 2036? Let's talk about this.
Yes.
Circle back to the big number. In 2036, executive powers and martial law come into play because Congress can't basically govern. And the reason why is there's about 3 lobbyists for every elected official in Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway. And they pay off these elected officials to vote on things for them. And they do. But it doesn't mean they're working for the people.
Actually, they're not working for the people. They're working for the lobbyists, especially if they're doing their bidding and accepting their large portions of cash and other gifts.
You know, like I've heard some numbers on Nancy Pelosi, and she's almost a billionaire.
Yeah. And you living where I live, Mr. Titor, we both know that she is big, bad news.
Well, she's the Speaker of the House. Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, he's just as bad. You know, like I've heard some things about Chuck Schumer that I won't repeat on radio, so we won't go there. But these people, they think that they're, like under the radar. They're not. We've had a very corrupt FBI, and some of the people at the FBI have been removed. And I gave Donald Trump a list of people that I thought he needed to get rid of, and I posted it on Facebook. And one of the first people I said was Jeff Sessions. Get rid of him. And then I had a list of people he had to get rid of, and then I had the list of people to be indicted, and Hillary and Bill Clinton for Uranium One and giving uranium to the Russians
and Iranians, right?
Yes, and like $1 billion to Iran. Oh my God! Barack Obama, like him and the Attorney General in his administration, their fast and furious gun giveaway to the drug lords in Mexico.
Operation Fast and Furious with ATF that had a bunch of guns going down to the cartels that were supposed to be tracked, and we're talking about I believe a tractor trailer load of guns. I mean, AK-47s, M16s, right? And yet we lost them all. So it sounds to me that it wasn't so much of a mistake, Mr. Titor, but on purpose.
Yes, it was. One of the things that this will all get ironed out when they get done trying to indict or impeach Donald Trump. He's going to move ahead with some indictments. Loretta Lynch is on the list.
Yes.
James Comey on the list.
Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, John Brennan, right?
Yes. I told them to basically indict. And they're all facing violations of federal law. Some of them, it amounts to sedition and treason.
I was just going to say treason. Yeah, thank you for beating me to that, because I definitely think some of these actions by these bad deep state actors is literally treasonous.
So by the time you get to 2036, the president of the United States will have increased powers, emergency powers to implement policy. And it works, and the American people accept it. The American people are so fed up with what happens in the Washington, D.C. Beltway. It's crazy. I basically I have a YouTube channel, and it's only been up for a couple of weeks, and I think I have about a dozen YouTube clips on there, and it's just under the name John Titor. But you can find it by going through my Facebook page, 177th Time Travel Division, and I encourage people to become subscribers. And I basically did a dissertation in one YouTube video, and I said that we need to have 10 million people march on Washington, D.C., go to the office of Nancy Pelosi and take her into custody, and go to Charles Schumer's office and take him into custody and have a public trial followed by swift public justice.
I actually heard some rumors that these cases will be handled by military tribunals, and one of the venues for these trials would be Guantanamo Bay. Have you heard anything like that?
That they moved a ship to Guantanamo Bay?
That's where they're going to have the trials for these people.
And there will be military tribunals and executions.
And this is obviously what we all need to see happen to show that those who are literally performing acts of treason will have to pay for their crimes, not just for rigging the election against Donald Trump, but for the murders that Hillary and the Clinton Foundation have been involved in, for all sorts of things that have come to light only after President Donald J. Trump has been in office and finally started to expose what these deep state actors have done and the conspiracy against him, from both trying to make sure he didn't win and that had Donald Trump won, to have an insurance policy to get him out. And the deeper I've gone into this, from speaking to people like Dr. Jerome Corsi and Roger Stone, I've literally been blown away at how many people were involved and were so blatant about it. That's why I mentioned John Brennan, former CIA director. You mentioned James Comey and Andrew McCabe, the former director of the FBI, as well as his second in command. I believe there's close to 30 people. I'm talking about big people, from Barack, Michelle, Bill, Hillary, and all the other people involved. Huma Abedin, etc.
Oh, Huma Abedin and her husband.
Weiner, Anthony Weiner.
Anthony Weiner. He's in prison. Huma Abedin, I don't know where she is, but I don't think that she's doing much of anything but waiting.
Well, do you know she's Hillary's lover?
Yeah. Well, for the longest time, when Bill Clinton was in office in the White House, there was a woman that Hillary, a young woman that Hillary kept in the White House. And finally, the Secret Service spirited her out of the White House. She was being held against her will.
Wow. And you know what? Honestly, John, that does not surprise me, because Hillary literally has believed since her husband was in office that she's untouchable. Look at so many violations that she has done, that had it been any other person or politician, not only would they have been impeached, handcuffs would have been slapped on them, and there would be a public trial and possibly an execution. But this woman literally believes she is untouchable, and that's why I cannot wait for the day that the indictments come, early morning raids come, and to these people at once, all at the same time, and literally break down their doors, arrest them, and bring them in to finally face justice. Now, because you've gone to the future, John, do you know approximately what year we're going to start seeing people like Hillary facing trial and maybe getting executed, as a lot of us hope to happen?
I don't think that we're going to see an execution in the near future, but long term, I think that when treason is proved, maliciously proved, and there's just the list of what she's done criminal. She collected millions for the relief of Haiti after the island was hit by a hurricane. And she kept every nickel.
Yep.
Millions.
Pocketed.
Over $100 million, her and Bill. I mean, the list just is so long. And there is so many women. If you say anything against Hillary, oh my God. But here's the facts. We know there was that gentleman that they thought that he was going to say something to the press, and they basically shot him on a street corner in the back and called it a robbery. He had a wad of cash in his pocket and a reasonably new Rolex on his wrist. They didn't touch that. And he worked for DNC, and they killed him. He knew too much. This whole thing about creating a false file on Donald Trump. I mean, the DNC funded a fake file on him, and it was all lies. If you look at American history, when a president is out of office, he's done his 2 terms, he's done. He usually retires, goes back to his hometown, works on his library. Barack Obama has not done that. He stayed in Washington, D.C. He's worked very hard against Donald Trump. And he doesn't care if he brings down the country doing it. And all these things that they're doing were just ultimately going to put more power in the hands of the executive branch of government, and the legislative branches will be diminished significantly in the very near future. I put Robert Mueller on the list to be indicted.
Yes, thank you for saying
that. Robert Mueller will be indicted as soon as he's done, because the new people at FBI are going to eat him alive. He doesn't know it. He doesn't seem to see it coming. And I'm going to be laughing because Roger Stone, he's going to have a good time. All these people that have been interrogated without a lawyer present, or, browbeaten or intimidated. That one general that they indicted, and they shouldn't have even been talking to him, Flynn, without him having a lawyer there. And they didn't make him aware of that. And then the judge went to sentence Flynn and said that. Why didn't he have a lawyer present? And Mueller has tried to back up on that whole thing and say, oh, we made a mistake. His rights, people have rights. Now, we'll move on here to 2036.
Yes.
Okay? There is a United States, okay? But we're still a protectorate. And the tall whites take an active role in the administration of the United States government. They will. They will. They have a vested interest in this planet. And I'll tell you why they come here and why they exist here, is that we are a convenient place for them to make a connection as they leave this galaxy and go to another nearby galaxy, Andromeda. Okay? So these are all things that are in the mix. So eventually, term limits will come into play. They'll be mandated, and then the American people will get to vote on them, and it'll be done finally. Donald Trump is going to get his wall. Make no mistake, it's coming. But by 2036, what the mankind on this planet is having issues with the environment. Okay?
Is the environment damaged because of our pollution and the hole in the ozone layer and things like that?
Yes. It's all going to come to play, and we're going to be having more severe weather. Puerto Rico has not really revived itself to where it was. And, we'll see more of these things happening, more tsunamis, hurricanes, cyclones. We're going to see these things. And there's not much we can do. The planet is undergoing changes, and not for the better. And then people will become aware there are off-world colonies that are self-sufficient. How do you get to an off-world colony? Well, they're going to say first, if you've ever been convicted of a crime, you ain't going. If you don't have skills and a high school or college degree, you're not going. You see what I'm saying?
So they're limiting the people that are going to meet the certain qualifications. Is that what you're getting at?
That's what I'm getting at. So then a lot of people will, be protesting about that. And then there will be prices of food and housing, utilities will be legislated or mandated by government. So we'll have price controls.
So no more gouging.
No more gouging, but we're going to have price controls. And what we're going to see is legislation that basically gives a reward to a person who blows the whistle on someone that is doing something wrong and they're on the government payroll. And we're going to see a very open-ended thing saying there can be no reprisals against them for blowing the whistle, and they will receive a bounty for doing it. Okay? And you're going to see prosecutions, and people in high and low places get prosecuted. And sometimes it'll be military tribunals. Okay? Just depends on where they're at in the government. So you're going to see a lot of that. And then you'll see people incarcerated, and they will go to prisons that are not like the prisons we have today. There will be prisons where they make things or grow things, because we have so many people incarcerated now. It's ridiculous.
Can you set the scene for us of what 2036 looks like? Is it basically what we're seeing now, aside from having the environmental issues, or are cars going to stop using the internal combustion engine? Or maybe even take it a step further, just like the movie Back to the Future Part 2, where cars are now flying, things like that. How would you describe, say, for instance, did you see the city of Los Angeles in 2036?
Yes, we had drones that carried people. It's all very tightly controlled. Air traffic control and controlling the airspace becomes a major thing. And will have like designated areas where drones can fly that carry people, or drones that fly carrying cargo. And it's going to be all designated flight lanes, a little bit like Back to the Future. Yes, you're going to see that. And you're also going to see bullet trains and things like that. Absolutely. Electric cars. By 2036, the internal combustion engine is dead.
About time, because it doesn't just go back to the 19th century when automobiles were used. It goes back to, I think, 6th century AD with the Chinese rockets burning chemicals to create thrust to shoot up in the sky. And that's kind of disgusting when you look at all these other technologies we have. For instance, smartphones. John, I'm sure you remember 20, 30 years ago. I mean, a desktop computer 20 years ago, say 1999, is nowhere near as powerful as one of the cheapest iPhones that you could buy brand new right now.
iPhones in 2036 do a whole lot more than they even do now. They can give you a physical and we're just on the cusp of that now. Monitor your heart. Everything goes to a doctor that is monitoring your health file and things like that. So some things will be better. More people will be taking classes online and things like that. We'll see a lot more of that interface, artificial intelligence. We'll see some laws put in place about AI, and they don't want AI to become self-aware.
Yes, because if they become self-aware, I've already talked to a couple of people. David Adair was one when he was on the show a few months ago, and even Father Jack Ashcraft. And when we talked about AI, things I've already feared, John, these two gentlemen were able to confirm. For instance, in one of the testings of AI that Father Ashcraft was saying was that the AI was beginning to hide things from its masters, meaning us, the humans.
Right.
And other times, AI wanted to destroy its masters, meaning us. And if that's the case, John, well, then the movie Terminator 2 with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Judgment Day, yes, that movie was science fiction, but at the same time, if we are all plugged in, meaning the internet globally, and if everything is connected in one way or another to the internet, from ICBMs to nuclear weapons to drones, etc., if AI becomes self-aware, then they will have control of all that. And I don't know if there's a way for us to stop it. What do you say about that?
It will be very difficult. But what happens is when they have a situation where they think that a computer system or network is self-aware, they will destroy it.
Smart, because I could see that being the downfall of humanity.
I mean, they actually will just go in and shred it. Every piece will be accounted for, and they will shred it, and they'll have teams of people to do the work. If we move on now, I went as far in the future as 2050.
Yes, so 31 years from now.
Yeah, and what we're going to see is mankind knows that we're doomed. I've stayed on this planet to put the message out on the environment that we should have been trying to preserve and clean up the oceans decades ago and didn't.
Especially with Fukushima, it's been leaking radiation into our water for years now.
Yes, and it was covered up.
Yes, drastically. And it's such a major threat, John, and they're not talking about it as the way they should be.
We don't get that on the 6 o'clock news. So, and we won't see it on CNN or any of the other networks. You might see it on OANN.
Yes. Hey, it's funny you mentioned that. That's according to Roger Stone when I asked him, because I don't really believe in any of the news channels as being unbiased or being truthful. One American News, OANN, to me is the closest that I could find to any credible network. And when I asked that to Roger Stone, he said that, and of course InfoWars, since he does a show on that. And that was just more confirmation to me that, hey, we finally have the closest we're ever going to have to the truth being told as opposed to propaganda.
What's going to happen in the future is that some of these other networks, I mean, nobody really pays attention to CNN now. And OANN, One American News Network, will step in and buy them up. And you will see that One American News Network they continue to try to just put the truth in front of the viewers.
And they're doing a darn good job. That's for darn sure.
What a concept. But by the time we get to 2050, state and local governments are having trouble governing. We have a whole lot more National Guard call-ups for domestic disturbances. We have more policemen on the street. Like there'll be some back and forth about limiting weapons, and then people are going to find out, and this is going to be just a whole radical thing. There's something called a Gauss gun.
A Gauss gun?
A-U-S-S, and it's a gun, okay? It's an electric rifle or pistol, and it's not a firearm. But the lethality of it is incredible, and anybody can build it. So people will stop trying to build firearms, and they'll build electric rifles that shoot a projectile. And these things are not, doesn't come under firearms. The ATF can't do anything about them, and they just proliferate. And that'll be a big change. And the other big change is, and the People's Republic of China don't issue firearms to their army anymore. They're laser weapons. Now, they issue laser weapons.
In 2050, what was the most populated country? Is it still China, or some people suggested, is it India?
China will have the greatest population, but they're going to have problems feeding their people. And so will India. And it'll just be incredible. Famine. And what to do when people die from famine, and food rationing. And then the medical infrastructure, like the clinics and the hospitals, they will all have difficulties. So these things will be severely degraded, and the earth is dying. Scientific American, who I have actually written articles for, they come up and they say by 2100, all life will be dead on this planet. I gave it to 2200 in one white paper, a scientific paper that I wrote. I said, 2200, all life will be dead on this planet.
Now, that's from the people that are living on Earth, but I would think, Mr. Titor, that at that point, Homo sapiens and other life has already relocated to some of these other habitable planets, I would think. Is that true?
Yes. And again, it won't be a mass exodus. Like the people that'll get to go don't have a criminal record. They have, they're tradesmen, they have skills. A bricklayer, he's a valuable person. A cement finisher, that's a valuable skill.
Plumber.
A carpenter, plumber, an electrician. These people, they need, what they don't need are pimps.
Lawyers.
Well,
right?
they'll have lawyers, but they don't need pimps or drug pushers or gang people. One of the things that we're going to see in the future is with MS-13, they are going to pass an MS-13 law. And it will be join a gang, go to prison. The work farm. And I mean, they're going to work. And a long-term, after they do their time and are senior citizens, they'll be released. And they will have been allowed to earn money while they are incarcerated. But that's, like they're at end of life at that point already. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And for these people, there'll be reduced medical benefits. They're not going to get steak for dinner either. And so that's what happens to them. If you're not a productive member of society, society can't afford you.
Yeah, that's for darn sure.
So, and what happened when I took a team to 2050 and we did an exhaustive survey of the planet and saw how bad things were, that I came back from the survey and I had people on my team that had PTSD. They couldn't handle the future of planet Earth.
Because of what they saw, I'm assuming.
Yes. And so some of them had to go to therapy. The Army and the Air Force, Marines, and Navy, it will be an amalgamation. We will still have a separate Space Force, however. Even the Coast Guard will get to be amalgamated with our national defense. But the bottom line is these people, I counseled them, and then I had to refer them to the flight surgeon, and then the flight surgeon passed them on to a hospital, and then they had to be evaluated to see if they were going to remain in the military or discharged. It just went that bad and that fast.
Now, let me ask you about the past now. And the reason why I want to ask you about that is because a lot of people talk about a paradox, such as the grandfather paradox. And another topic a lot of people have talked about recently has been the Mandela effect, where things that were remembered as one way are now remembered as different ways. And one of the explanations for that is because time travelers have gone to the past and effectively have changed something slightly that causes people now to be in this alternate dimension where what was once remembered one way is remembered another way. So before we go into those questions and answers, let's talk about the furthest you've gone to the past and what caused you to do that.
I think about 230 BC. And we received intelligence from gray aliens that the Anunnaki were going to go to the past on this planet and try to take over what is China in 230 BC. There was a young king, the Emperor Qin, and he was just solidifying his power in China, and he was basically battling other kingdoms within China, and he had an army, he had a government, he had some issues with his own mother, who had some other children that were a threat to him. But the Anunnaki wanted to go back in time, and they wanted to raid his treasury. And he had, the treasury held tons of gold. And that is a big thing for the Anunnaki. And I mean, I saw the treasury, and there was gold, there was jade, precious gems. They were very well. And so I was sent back in time, and I had a combat team with me, and I went under the guise of just a trader, and we had my looks changed somewhat, so I looked more white Asian, and I had been sent to language school for months to learn to speak Mandarin and Cantonese. And they said, the Chinese that you're going to be speaking is somewhere in between. It may not be even spoken anymore, but you'll get by. And that worked. And I spoke Mandarin and Cantonese, and my team were all Asians, and they were proficient with swords and crossbows and the military weaponry of the time. And so I went there as a trader, and I said, look, I have a couple things to offer you if you'll pay me. I'll create them for your army. And was the first item was a repeating crossbow. And I put a picture of it in my first book, a repeating crossbow. And so what I was giving actually was something that eventually they were going to come up with anyway. And then I said, I have a process to chrome plate swords, and they will hold an edge forever if you chrome plate them. And they paid me to do that. And I got invited to the court of the emperor, and I sat down to have dinner with him a few times. And one of his cousins, this woman, she'd lost her husband, and he was the general of his army. And their new general didn't like me. And this woman befriended me and invited me to her apartments in the palace. And I did get into a little trouble doing that. But I felt like it would be taken as an insult if I refused. And then the people on my team that were with me, they said, you're going to put us in a position where we get our heads cut off. I said, no, I don't think so. So, and they were right. What happened was that I was challenged to a duel by this general who thought he was the local fast sword. It was a sword fight, and I'm pretty good with swords. I'm very old now, but I still have a sword. So they took us out into this big square, and they gave me some armor to put on. They said, he's wearing his, so you better wear this. And all my people were standing there, and there was a guard on each of my team. And I realized right then that if I didn't take this guy out, that they would all be beheaded in the next 20, 30 minutes.
There's a couple of questions in the chat, if you don't mind asking them or responding to them. This comes from Third Phase of Moon, one of the largest UFO YouTube channels, who I am proud to say are good friends of mine, and I've been working with for 7 years. They ask, can you ask Mr. Titor if he can show Third Phase of Moon flying saucer?
Now you've asked the question. There have been so many good sightings lately. From Arizona, or like people go to Rachel, Nevada, just about any night of the week.
Yes, where the little alien is, right?
Yes.
Yes.
I have been there, and I've sat out there on a Saturday night and taken great photos. I'd say, use something fast. A fast shutter speed is needed, and telephoto, and you'll get all you want.
Here is a very broad question, so I'm just going to read it word for word, and I hope we can get it unless this person actually expands on it. This comes from Hadley Scott McIntyre. Is there a threat? I don't know from where. I mean, is it ET or what? But he's just saying exactly, is there a threat? And this is literally underneath the question that Third Phase of Moon asked about flying saucer.
I would say this. The tall whites, they've done everything they could to preserve mankind, and I think they will continue to do so. And they're thousands of years ahead of mankind on this planet. They're in undisputed control of this planet. The Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, they know that. You can't dispute it. So I think that we're not going to see any threats. And the tall whites, let me explain something to you. I believe that they won't let mankind come to any harm. I wrote a white paper. It's out there on my Google Plus or my library on Google, and you can read it. But basically, what I'm saying is that we're protected, and they go out of their way to do it. We have, outside of the 4 species of extraterrestrials that we have agreements with, there are other species, and they're not above doing abductions and harvesting and farming Homo sapiens. They're not. And I've heard lots of good documented stories, even from Navajo police. On my trips to Arizona, when I sit down with them and talk to them, what I find out is about skinwalkers.
Ooh, okay. Can you describe what skinwalkers? Because when I hear the term skinwalkers, Mr. Titor, the impression I get is extraterrestrials that are wearing possibly dead humans as their skin in order to pass by as humans. Is that what you know them to be, or is there a different meaning?
No. And there are some Native Americans and others that are Homo sapiens that know about taking the skin of an animal and becoming that animal.
Oh, okay. So you could also, I don't want to say shapeshifter.
Yes, shapeshift. You become the animal.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Gotcha. So they could disguise themselves as anything, in other words.
Yes.
Walking amongst us, and we would never know that these are highly intelligent non-terrestrial beings.
Yes. And we know that reptilians can shapeshift. Okay.
Yeah, you just actually answered Hadley Scott McIntyre's question, which is, for real skinwalkers are shapeshifters, ? And that's exactly what you just said. Real quick, Mr. Titor, we have 15 minutes before we have to wind down to get you plugging in everything you want to tell the audience. When you went back to, I believe you said, I have it written down, 36 BC.
236 BC.
236 BC. Okay, 236 BC. Did you, I'm assuming that from 236 BC all the way to 2050, were there other times that you had stopped in?
Other times that I had
stopped in. For instance, maybe 300 AD or 1625, things like that.
There were times where I had teams of time travelers that they went back, and in my first book, Authorized Chronicles of John Titor II, which is available on Amazon and eBay, I have a section in there on time travel operations, how they are conducted. Okay? And if you read that, you'll understand that teams are sent to the past and to the future to observe and report, not to change the timeline. If you change the timeline, and if a lot of people change the timeline, what happens is you can cause a cataclysm in time. So time travel will not become a new hobby for people and everybody doing it. No, it won't work that way. And there are 3 ways to do time travel. You can do it with a static time travel machine designed by Dr. Michio Kaku, and there is one in existence, and I've used it. You can time travel using a TR-3B or something newer and faster, and it's all done with a very fast computer, and it's all based on creating gravitational waves, and boom, you just push in where you want to go and where you are, and it'll get you there. And the third way to time travel, we're going to talk about this and talk about Bruce Gernon. And he has traveled in time. And he's on Facebook. And you have to look up Bruce Gernon there and understand what he went through. He flew through electronic fog. And read that carefully. And so it is documented that he traveled in time. There have been other pilots in private aircraft that have flown through electronic fog, and it has happened to them. Now, Bruce Gernon was lucky. All that happened was he took off from, I think, an island in the Bahamas. He was going to Miami Airport, and he just arrived sooner than he should have, and used practically no gasoline getting there. So they measured the fuel in his tanks. They measured the time that he left and the time that he arrived, and there's no way that he could have done it. So he traveled a distance faster than he should have.
Here's another question for you, Mr. Titor. Can you describe what it's like as someone who has traveled through time, the experience of what you're seeing from being inside the time machine as you go from one time to another? How does it feel, and what sensations do you experience, and what do you actually see, and how long does it take you from the moment you start the time machine until the moment you arrive into the said time?
The stationary machine uses quantum mechanics. It's all based on a design that was actually even published and designed by Michio Kaku. And you stand there with your equipment, and you're transported, and things get to be a blur around you. And when you hit the arrival point, the blur ends and you're there. In a spacecraft, you're inside, and everything is stable inside the spacecraft, but on the outside of the spacecraft, you lose your sightings of planets and other fixed points around you. They become blurred too. So it's that different. But inside the spacecraft, you can walk around a little bit, and you know that in a few hours you're going to be at another time and destination. So that is the answer.
You mentioned Michio Kaku. Obviously, a lot of people know exactly who he is. He does a lot on television, and being an astrophysicist. Has he already invented this time machine, or is this something? Okay. Can you tell us?
They've had it for some time. I would say, I think that his plan, he probably wrote it early 2000, and I saw the plan, and then I went and saw the machine, and then they told me you're going to use the machine, and it's going to be a two-man team. And we used two-man teams, four-man teams, and then we had a device that we took with us so that we could basically initiate the return trip. And that device is described in my first book, Authorized Chronicles of John Titor II. I give a lot of technical details on the TR-3B and how we do time travel within the military. But, you know, like one of the things that I have to tell you is that I have, every once in a while, someone will dig up a way to contact me, telephone me or message me or email me, and they say they have a loved one they've lost and they want to go back in time.
To see him.
The answer is, I can't help you. The only way that you can really time travel, you have to be within the military. And there are probably other rogue people that try to build machines based on the white paper that Michio Kaku at one time had posted on the internet. And I'm sure they tried, but you have to have a tremendous amount of power and money to create a time machine, a static time machine. It works. They use it every day. I don't know what more to tell you, but those are the three basic things that happens. Now, that is not to say, you know, that there are other alternate realities that come into play, and there are natural time portals that exist. I know that there is a time portal within the Grand Canyon.
That's the first time I've actually heard of that. I've heard about portals on this planet, but the first time I've heard of one in the Grand Canyon.
And I know where it is. It's on Indian land, and it would be great difficulty. You can step through, but I don't know that you could step back out, okay? I don't know that it's not a one-way trip. And that's part of the problem with some of these things that occur in nature. And there's vortices that are all around this planet, magnetic vortices that from time to time open portals occur and they close up again. Now, we have something called the Bermuda Triangle.
Yes.
Sometimes we have a portal that opens up within the Bermuda Triangle. There's also one that occurs, they call it the Dragon Triangle.
That's by Japan,
South
right?
Tennessee's, yes.
Yes.
And these things, I mean, I'm not going to advocate for trying to go through. I would never attempt it myself. I don't want to do that. But people will do what people do. You know, like I've told people not to do things and they do them anyway. But I try to tell you, you know, all the things here. We have a little time left. I would like to say that you can go on to YouTube or you can go on to 177th Time Travel Division on Facebook and read my posts, and you'll learn how to navigate to my white papers, to my YouTube account. And I have a couple other pages on Facebook. One is the 177th Time Travel Division Team. And I openly recruit people in the sciences and things to go on little expeditions with me, and I chase down things from time to time. Last year I went to Lovelock Cave, and I thought that I would be able to, one way or another, ascertain what was really going on for there to be an 11-foot giant skeleton unearthed there and an 8.5 foot tall female skeleton unearthed there. And I chased down the skeletons to the Paiutes, who won't tell me where they are, because I just want to get a bone chip that I can use to do some DNA research. But I went to Lovelock.
We literally have a couple minutes left, so let me try to cram these final two questions. If you could just give a brief comment, and then let me just tell you everything once. The first question, is the TR-3B an actual extraterrestrial craft, or is it a craft that was reverse engineered by earthly materials? Secondly, can you describe how the grandfather paradox affects us? And then third, if you can give a final statement, and what you just plugged in your Facebook page, plug in anything else you want at the same time. That way we can get everything done before we go off air.
The grandfather paradox. This is a real situation. If you go back in time and you kill someone that was significant to a particular thing that occurred in the history of mankind, then you change the timeline. If you go back in time and you're responsible for killing Nikola Tesla.
Yeah.
Oh my God. What you have done is you have robbed mankind of probably our greatest engineer. Okay? Killing Thomas Alva Edison, another great mind. These people, you can't just go back in time and, kick over a bar stool and pick a fight with somebody, because they might be important to the timeline. So that's the entire gist of it. People that I had on time travel teams that reported to me, that went on the missions, observe and report and not be discovered, be able to talk about the weather, be able to talk about, local issues or politics of the time and be dressed appropriate to the time frame of where you are, wherever it is. Sometimes outsiders in certain parts of our civilization, you're just an outsider, they'd kill you. Or if you were in Salem at the time of the witch trials and you just looked a little out of ordinary, you might be burned at the stake for a witch. I mean, going back in time, it's not everything it's cracked up to be. And I've done it, and I've risked my life. And I think I should tell you that in the duel that I had with that general, and I write this in the book, I did prevail that day and saved my team. But you have to read my book, Authorized Chronicles of John Titor 2, available on eBay and Amazon, or read my second book, Continued Chronicles of John Titor 2, available also on eBay and Amazon. Now, I'm read all over the world. I have about 100,000 hits on my blog, and I'm read in every country on this planet except North Korea. And if you read my second book, I have a chapter in there that's about Kim Jong-un and what I think should be done with him. And I've done everything except send him a copy of the book. And I know that the Donald has read my book. And I supported Donald Trump's presidency and will continue to do so. And I predicted long before he ran that he would be president. And he's going to do 2 terms, and then Mike Pence will have a go at it if he wants.
That's the first time I've actually heard that. So after 2024, Pence would be on the Republican ticket as the president, running for the GOP. Very, very interesting, Mr. Titor. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I do want to thank you for joining us. This has been a fantastic show, and I definitely want to have you back on. Real quick, one more time. You mentioned your books where people can buy them on Amazon, eBay. Throw in your Facebook page one more time.
It's 177th Time Travel Division, and it's open to just about everybody. I admin the page pretty well. I don't let everybody just post anything they want to about, going to the store and shopping. Most of my stuff is about what I feel is threats to our democracy, or astrophysics, time travel. Some of it's devoted to what is going on with my ex-business partner, Jason Quitt, who forged an FBI document and stole a manuscript from me. Mm-hmm. When I talk about that, there is a publisher in Germany that has published a book of mine that he had no right to do. Jason Quitt forged my name on a contract, and lo and behold, this publisher has published the book in multiple languages all over Europe. And the way I found out was it went from softcover to hardcover, and these people call me or email me or message me or friend me on Facebook.
Well said, Mr. Titor. Like I said, we unfortunately have reached the end of the time. Please hang by real quick. I just want to tell everybody out there, thank you all for joining us. I do want to thank Pam Vrettenberg, who is my social media manager, as well as my graphic designer and engineer. Also, Josh Cherez, who happens to be my assistant producer, as well as the VP of operations. All of the people in YouTube Nation, I want to, if we had more time, I'd give you all a personal shout out, but I do want to recognize Third Phase of Moon for being my mentors and for working with me for the last 7 years. And I do want to thank Joe Montaldo, the owner of UPRN United Public Radio Network and 107.7 FM New Orleans, as well as JC of Deprogram Radio Network in the United Kingdom. With that being said, folks, this is Dr. J. Join us same place, same time tomorrow as we discuss George Adamski, and we will be speaking to the official person who runs the Adamski Foundation. With that being said, folks, this is Dr. J, and I wish you all a good night. For those of you in Europe, in the UK, and wherever else in the world, I wish you all a good morning. And now it is officially time for me to sign off.
At Hardee's, we love to surprise people. Surprise, we added